So, okay, good evening, everybody. Good to be with you here tonight. And another opportunity to look at the weekly Parsha and try to glean some precious insights. Precious insights from our portion. There's a striking and fascinating narrative this year, this week rather, with the Pesach Sheni, with the second Passover. And this is how I would like to lay it out. You know, this past couple months, you know, we've been preoccupied with the coronavirus, and has had many different ramifications across society. One of the ramifications has been from the IRS, traditionally an agency that would probably not be very fond in the eyes of people, gave us a couple goodies this year because of the coronavirus. Number one, they said normally the tax deadline is on April 15th. This year, because of the coronavirus, we're going to push it off for 3 months, and it's going to be July 15th. But it didn't stop there. They, you know, the federal government, when I say they, through the IRS, made sure that everybody, every taxpayer had a certain amount of money deposited into their account, or a check was mailed to them. So this year, instead of the IRS collecting money, they pushed off their deadline and they actually gave out some money. So I imagine that this was greeted with a very positive reaction by the recipients. I know it was, was greeted with a positive reaction by myself. It's nice to get a couple extra dollars. It's nice to, it was a good feeling. It's nice to know that the deadline for taxes has been pushed off. So with that in mind, I want to pose the following question. You know, one source of stress every year for observant Jews is the preparation of Pesach. There's a lot of stress that goes into preparing for Pesach. First of all, how to turn over your kitchen for Pesach. And how do you do it? Then with the boiling water, and is that enough? And then how do you get all the appropriately kosher for Passover foods? And this year, you know, there's kosher for Passover margarine available in town. What are we going to do? You know, let's look it up online. This year, that this product is missing. So, and then you got to clean, and then you got to cook, and then you got to and then you got to. It's an extraordinary amount of stress, and some of us handle it better than others. So suppose we got a letter in the mail. You know, or not a letter in the mail, whatever form of communication it was. We got known to us that this year, for whatever, you know, obviously this past year was a very unusual year, but we kept Pesach, obviously, you know, the best way we could, you know, this year. But by hypothetically speaking, let's say, for example, one year, we're going to get known to us that you don't have to observe Pesach this year. No matzah required, no shmur matzah required, no 4 cups of wine, no staying up late saying over the Seder, you know, no requirement to abstain from chametz. You know, this year, you're off the hook. Off the hook. You know, how would we perceive such an announcement? I imagine we would, you know, there would be a certain amount of relief involved. This year, you know, we don't got to make the, we don't got to make the joke at the Seder that, why is this called poor man's bread if it's $20 a pound? You know, this year, you know, we're spared from koshering our kitchens. This year, we're spared from, you know, preparing, cleaning. This year, we're spared from, it would be quite a relief. But there's a very telling narrative in this week's Parsha. That's exactly what happened one year in the desert, that people were not able to experience the Pesach, or rather the Korban Pesach, the sacrificial Passover sacrifice. And the reason they weren't able to experience it because they were considered ritually impure. And the Torah taught us that if someone's considered ritually impure, putting aside the discussion for a moment of how somebody became to that state, they were no longer able to eat the Pesach. So they were exempt, off the hook, off the hook. And yet they approached Moses, they approached Moshe with the following complaint. And they said to Moshe, they said to Moshe and Aaron, we have been considered ritually impure. So they say the following, why should we be deprived? We insist on finding a solution where we can go ahead and find a way for us to bring a Korban Pesach. Basically, the fact that we were exempt from the mitzvah is leaving us so unsatisfied. We want to seek the ability to fulfill the mitzvah some way, somehow. Moshe, can you find us a way how to let us fulfill this mitzvah some way, somehow? Moshe's like, I got to talk to the big man upstairs. Got to talk to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He talks to God, and God says, look, yeah, they missed the chance the first time around on the 14th of Nisan, but don't you worry, the 14th of Iyar is coming up, and on the 14th of Iyar, you can bring what's called the Pesach Sheni. You can bring a second sacrificial lamb. So I wanted to kind of unpack this in a couple different ways. Because had we been there, had we been told in some way, somehow, that we were exempt from Passover that year, how would we have greeted that? I imagine, like I said earlier, there would have been a great, I'm not being presumptuous by saying what anybody here listening how they would have reacted, how you would have reacted. But I'm thinking that even a part of me would have been very relieved. Off the hook from Pesach this year. But these people had precisely the opposite reaction. They had the opposite reaction. They said, Lama nigara. Why were we exempt? Why should we be deprived? This really touches upon a point of how somebody should look at the mitzvahs. The mitzvahs in the Torah, because you can look at it in one of two ways. Perhaps there's more ways, but you can look at it in one of two ways. Two general ways. You can look at the 613 mitzvahs as 613 means of connection. God gave us the Torah, and He gave us the Torah because He wants to have a connection to us. And He gave us the ability, He gave us the means to have a connection with Him by giving us all these mitzvahs. Every time I put tefillin on, or every time I keep Shabbos, or every time I observe Pesach, or every time I give tzedakah, whatever it is, it's a means to a higher goal. What's the means to the higher goal? Getting closer to God. Getting closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at the 613 mitzvahs is 613 restrictions. Look at all the things I'm restricted from. I can't eat this. I can't marry this person. I can't go ahead and enjoy my Saturdays like my neighbor does. I can't, it's such a restrictive lifestyle. Who would ever choose to go ahead and adopt all these restrictions for themselves? So one difference between the two approaches is this case study itself. If somebody is told you're exempt from a mitzvah, according to the first way that the 613 mitzvahs are 613 means of opportunity of connection to God, a person would feel deprived. Oh my goodness, I don't have the mitzvah. I mean, there's one less way for me to connect to God. But if you view the 613 mitzvahs, the 613 restrictions, then if I don't have to do the mitzvah, I have one less thing to worry about. I'm actually perfectly happy that I'm exempt from the mitzvah. We see from this people in the desert, when they approached Moshe, we see from them how they viewed the mitzvahs. They viewed the mitzvahs as opportunities for connection. And that's the way we should view the mitzvahs. We should view the mitzvahs as opportunities to connect to God. He gave us these opportunities in this temporary and finite world, that if we connect to him in this temporary and finite world, we have the connection with him for eternity in the eternal world. So what's the ticket? What's the ticket to get to the eternal world? And the answer is, it's the mitzvahs in the Torah. So any mitzvah that I don't have the opportunity to fulfill, I feel a certain emptiness. I feel a certain sadness. I feel in a sense deprived, and that was the feeling of the people in the desert. On the other hand, if I view the mitzvahs as a bunch of different restrictions, I don't see the meaning in it. I don't see the connection to Hashem. I don't see the ticket to the eternal world. All I see in front of me is thou shalt not. Thou shalt not do this. Thou shalt do this. Thou shalt wake up early in the morning and go put tefillin on and pray to God. The bunch of thou shalt and thou shalt nots. That is an unfortunate perspective on the mitzvahs. So that's point number one I'd like to make tonight. Point number one, what we see from the story of the people demanding a way, somehow, some way, to fulfill the mitzvah of Pesach. I just want to touch upon the second point I'd like to make, and that is that God told Moshe, even though they didn't have the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah the first time around, you have the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah the second time around. This is a larger point that we find in the Torah of second chances. Second chances. We're not meant to be perfect. We're not expected to achieve perfection all the time. In fact, it says in Mishlei, King Solomon wrote in Proverbs, Sheva yipol tzaddik v'kam. The righteous man falls down 7 times and then gets back up. And the rabbis have commented on the verse. It's not because, despite the fact that he's fallen down 7 times, he still gets back up. It's precisely because he's had all these setbacks and he has all these challenges, he's able to get back up. And we have to remember that for ourselves, that we many times do not succeed the first time. Many times we don't succeed the second time either. And many times we are like the people in the desert that couldn't fulfill the Pesach. It says over there, the reason why they couldn't fulfill the Pesach was for 2 reasons. The Torah says, afterwards God told Moshe, if a person is considered ritually impure, he's considered ritually impure, or he is on a distant path from Jerusalem. I think this can be interpreted also in a different way. He's considered impure, not necessarily in ancient biblical times, the way how somebody, in today's time, 2020, a person is struggling with purity, a person struggling with spirituality, a person is not able to go ahead and make that connection with God the first time around. Or if he's b'derech rechoka, he's in a faraway place, in a spiritual place as well. He's from the derech of connecting, the path of connecting to God, he's far away. But don't you worry, said God to us through Moshe. Even if you missed out the first time, there's still the second time. If you missed out the second time, as long as the heart still beats, the person is still alive, you can always come back. You can always have that connection. These 2 incredible perspectives, I think, one should take when we study this narrative in the portion. First of all, how do we go ahead and view the mitzvahs? How do we go ahead and view view the commandments in the Torah? Do we view them as ways of connection, or do we view them as restrictions? It behooves us to go ahead and study this portion of how people, when they didn't get the opportunity to fulfill mitzvah, how deprived they felt. Do we feel the same way? That should gnaw at our internal self as well. And finally, if you didn't succeed the first time, you didn't achieve perfection, you didn't achieve a satisfactory result, don't you worry. Of course, we should always strive our best. But Pesach Sheni teaches us this important and compelling lesson that God always gives second chances. I wish you all wonderful Shabbos.